The Grindle Slacksnatch first waddled into the lobby of the Royal Exchange, wearing a pinstriped waistcoat that had clearly been stitched together out of stolen curtains. The trousers were different lengths, the shoes were different colors, and the tie, if a knotted ribbon decorated with pentagrams can be called that, had been dipped in something faintly luminous. Nobody paid much attention until he produced a business card. It identified him in respectable copperplate as Senior Market Oracle, Certified Leaf Reader, Chartered Goblin Stockbroker. The receptionist was halfway through rolling her eyes when Grindle added, "Also part-time chaos consultant. You'll want to remember that when the scones begin screaming." A dozen startled blinks later, security was called, but not swiftly enough. Grindle had already signed himself into the building ledger with a flourish of emerald ink that smelled like moss and moonshine. He should have been escorted out. Instead, the timing of his arrival coincided perfectly with the latest market wobble. The glamorous unicorn-themed beverage company Sparkle Fizz had lost 18% of its valuation overnight. When the house brokerage firm Billowick & Sons realized an unusually small creature had just predicted the slump earlier that morning on a Goblin podcast no human admitted listening to, curiosity won out over protocol. By 11 o'clock, Grindle was perched on the corner of an oak boardroom table, dangling his stubby legs and organizing a sampler tray of loose-leaf teas like a jeweler laying out diamonds. His audience consisted of 8 investors, 1 risk officer, and a lawyer who had no idea why he was there, but had been told to keep an eye on things in case a blood pact was offered. "First rule," Grindle announced, "the leaves never lie. They may gossip, they may exaggerate, but they do not lie. Second rule, if you hear them singing Offenbach, sell your shoelaces and prepare for rain. Third rule, never snort Darjeeling through your nose, it burns on the way out." The lawyer raised a timid hand to ask a question about Offenbach. The goblin shushed him by flicking a teaspoon that somehow embedded itself in a mahogany paneling like a throwing knife. Silence became immediate and universal. He brewed 8 individual cups, each a different blend. To the first banker he gave white peony, to the second lapsang souchong, to the third a questionable infusion labeled experimental. That cup glowed. Grindle swirled each drink clockwise, stared into it with bulbous yellow eyes and muttered. After a minute, he scribbled predictions on napkins. "Shipping indexes to wobble by Tuesday. Gold price will hiccup then sneeze. Sell Sparkle Fizz before the CEO tweets about ferrets." The risk officer examined the handwriting, found it oddly beautiful, and faintly wondered whether the ink was blood. It was beetroot. Mostly, the next day, every single prophecy materialized. The shipping index wobbled. Gold hiccuped then, demonstrating that economics cares nothing for dignity, recorded a sneeze-shaped chart pattern. Sparkle Fizz's CEO, in a live stream to calm investors, spontaneously produced a ferret from her handbag, and the stock went into freefall. The 8 investors were thrilled, albeit confused. They invited Grindle back, and this time Billowick & Sons gave him a corner office, a plaque, and a kettle older than most small countries. Within a fortnight, he was firm legend. The press dubbed him the Brew Prophet. Traders fought for appointments. Someone from the Ministry of Commerce tried to regulate him and left clutching a pamphlet titled Official Goblin Exemption Clause, handwritten during the meeting and stamped by a wax seal that smelled of cinnamon. Compliance officers developed headaches, attempting to decide whether divination counted as insider information. The floor of the exchange began to reek pleasantly of bergamot. Everyone agreed things had grown ridiculous. Absolutely nobody left the building. The lunacy escalated on the day Grindle produced the teapot of potentialities, a copper monstrosity allegedly forged from the kettle of a disgruntled volcano spirit. It hissed when empty, giggled when filled, and most concerning, politely asked after investors' childhood pet names. People queued to confess. A hedge fund manager admitted his hamster had been called Captain Wiggles. The teapot burped a bubble shaped like the NASDAQ composite and promptly announced that Captain Wiggles would have sold biotech stocks before lunch. Biotech fell by 3% that afternoon. Captain Wiggles achieved posthumous fame. By this stage, investors were showing signs of strain. They began sleeping in the hallway outside Grendel's office so they wouldn't miss a whisper of kettle wisdom. A woman known for her cool demeanor burst into tears when the goblin served her Earl Grey instead of Irish breakfast, convinced it was an omen. Another shaved his head after spotting a stray chamomile blossom in the corridor. He insisted the blossom looked like a question mark, obviously warning that hair-based futures were about to plummet. No such market existed. He tried to invent it, lost everything, and blamed hibiscus. Despite the chaos, the profits kept rolling. Grendel's leaf readings delivered uncanny timing. Short oil, long cotton, buy beet futures only if the steam from your cup curved left. There was, however, one consistent blank spot. Whenever anyone requested predictions about the infamous Goblin-manufactured cryptocurrency, Gobcoin, the leaves went suspiciously silent. They rearranged themselves into frowns. The teapot giggled and refused to comment. Investors whispered that some dark truth was hidden there, and in the vacuum of information, speculation spread like mold on warm cheese. Enter Belinda Hardcastle, the most skeptical analyst in the city. She wore steel-rimmed spectacles and kept a spreadsheet for everything, including breakfast conversations. She considered tea a distraction from coffee and goblins a distraction from literally everything. Belinda requested a private audience and confronted Grendel, pinning him with a gaze so sharp the teapot tried to climb off the desk. "Explain your methodology," she demanded. "Statistical basis, data sources, error margins, everything?" Grendel, unruffled, offered her a cup of oolong so floral it smelled like a garden had decided to gossip. She refused. He shrugged, drank it himself, and addressed her questions. Methodology: the leaves hush, and I have ears. Data sources: quantum anxieties drifting in the steam. Error margins: plus or minus a baked potato. Belinda scribbled, frowned, and informed him that potatoes were not a recognized unit. "Only because economists lack imagination," replied Grendel. She left, announcing an intention to publish a damning exposé. 2 days later, Belinda hadn't slept. She had downloaded every ticker tape since the invention of ink, cross-referenced Grendel's predictions, checked lunar cycles, and compared weather patterns in cities whose names she couldn't pronounce. The numbers matched too precisely for coincidence. Her report turned from exposé to begrudging admiration. Before she could reveal her findings, a courier pigeon delivered a letter scented faintly of peppermint. "The leaves thank you for your diligence. They recommend you buy socks." She bought socks. The company producing those socks announced a government contract that afternoon. The price quadrupled. Belinda threw her spreadsheets in the air, declared reality a suggestion, and joined the hallway camp outside Grendel's office. Meanwhile, the investors themselves were unraveling. Profits felt great, but the cost and sanity climbed. They heard the rustle of teapot giggles in their dreams. One man insisted he saw candlestick charts swirling in his cereal milk. Group therapy sessions were arranged in the cafeteria, moderated by a barista promoted far beyond her pay grade. She wrote affirmations in foam art. "You are more than your margin call. Breathe in, breathe out, hold, don't short." The climax loomed during a quarterly earnings conference. Every major firm tuned in, craving guidance. Grendel sauntered onto the stage, carrying a tray of identical porcelain cups. Today, he announced, "We brew simultaneously. Collective steeping fosters communal fate." Investors obediently sipped as instructed. Inhale aroma, tilt, swirl, stare. They tried, but the only thing visible was wet leaves. Grendel peered into each cup, nodding sagely, occasionally tutting. Finally, he declared, "The market will pirouette, then buffet, then sing a lullaby, prepare accordingly." Analysts begged for specifics. Grendel wagged a finger. "If I told you everything, where's the sport?" Besides, the leaves requested ambiguity. They're feeling theatrical. That afternoon, the market went berserk in ways no algorithm could explain. Tech stumbled, energy soared, poultry futures jitterbugged. And just when traders thought it had settled, the stock of a sleepy pillow manufacturer skyrocketed because someone misheard lullaby as lullaby. The press tried to interview Grendel for comment, but he was found hanging upside down from a chandelier, snoring. He'd tacked a note to his waistcoat. Do not wake until the Dow recites poetry. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, not accustomed to verse, nevertheless complied the next morning. 1,000 restless investors interpreted minor fluctuations as iambic pentameter. One swore he detected a haiku about inflation. Only when the index briefly traced the shape of a sonnet did they nudge Grindle awake. He blinked, yawned, and asked for chamomile. The moment the kettle whistled, the market calmed, as if someone had flipped a cosmic mute switch. Traders collapsed at their desks, half in awe, half in nervous exhaustion. By now, the financial authorities could no longer ignore matters. A delegation led by the governor of the central bank arrived, carrying rules, regulations, and a mild terror of goblins. They presented an ultimatum: either Grindle submit his methods for peer review or cease all prognostication. The exchange floor held its breath. Grindle scratched his chin, producing a noise like sandpaper on tile. The leaves are very private, he explained. Show them a laboratory and they'll curl up tighter than hedgehogs. The governor insisted. Grindle sighed and proposed a demonstration under controlled conditions. The officials agreed, though their definition of controlled did not originally include marmalade. But the goblin insisted, and nobody was brave enough to argue. On the appointed morning, the test chamber, actually a repurposed supply closet, contained a calibrated kettle, a stack of regulatory forms, 3 civil servants, 1 actuary, and an emergency ferret, for benchmarking obviously. Grindle brewed a cup of Ceylon, gazed and predicted. In exactly 17 minutes the price of copper will hiccup. Following that, pigeons will disrupt broadband in exactly 1 downtown square, causing a microflash crash in online retailers, rebounding before anyone can say regulatory oversight, sign here to verify. He produced a quill. The actuary checked his watch skeptically. 17 minutes later, copper hiccuped. Nobody had ever described a price chart that way before, but the data couldn't be argued. Then pigeons, apparently incensed by an unattended bagel, descended on Main Plaza, shorted a transformer, and cut broadband. Online retailers wobbled. The civil servants tried to utter regulatory oversight, but the words tangled themselves, coming out as regulatory overbite. Prices rebounded. Grindle bowed, offered marmalade sandwiches, and asked them not to get sticky on the paperwork. The governor conceded. Perhaps a limited exemption is in order. Grindle, spreading marmalade on a clause labeled Clause 7B, Unfathomable Phenomena, suggested a compromise. He would publish weekly guidance available to all, reducing accusations of favoritism, provided the central bank supplied unlimited tea. The governor hesitated. Unlimited tea is a serious commitment, but market calm is priceless. The contract was signed in violet ink that smelled faintly of thunderstorms. And so commenced the era of the Weekly Brew Bulletin, a document that began with polite tasting notes, hints of citrus, undertones of impending recession, and ended with cryptic footnotes. If the biscotti crumbles thrice, remember umbrella. Investors devoured each edition, then inevitably misinterpreted it, and in doing so drove the market in the very direction the leaves foretold. Self-fulfilling prophecies became the new normal. Economists coined a term, the enthusiastic loop. With the bulletin widely distrusted, yet universally followed, competition for private consultations waned, except regarding Gobcoin. Remember Gobcoin? The hush surrounding it irritated speculators like an unscratched itch. Rumors swirled that Grindle's silence disguised either doom or dazzling riches. Hedge fund manager Pamela Ziegler, whose motto was, "If it's volatile, I want it," decided to break the stalemate. She cornered Grindle near the water cooler, brandishing a teacup she'd stolen from his desk. "Tell me about Gobcoin, or I start dunking chamomile in it repeatedly until these leaves sing." Grindle took back the cup gently, patted it as one might a traumatized hedgehog, and sighed. "Very well. The leaves stay silent because Gobcoin is not shaped by economics or aroma, but by belief. It's a goblin children's prank that accidentally acquired a market cap. If enough people think it will spike, it spikes. If they think it will crash, it crashes. The leaves refuse to predict self-delusion. It's impolite." Pamela scoffed. That's just momentum trading dressed in fairy wings. She bought Gobcoin anyway, told everyone she knew, and within hours the price surged. The next day it nosedived because someone tweeted a picture of an empty teacup captioned, "I no longer believe." Pamela's hair allegedly turned gray overnight. Despite occasional casualties, overall prosperity soared. Charities benefited, infrastructure improved, people painted their office walls cheerful colors they never previously dared. But as profits accumulate, so does paranoia. Investors started seeing patterns in wallpaper. One claimed the floral design behind his desk spelled short soybeans. He shorted soybeans. It worked. The wallpaper became corporate legend, tours were offered, someone attempted to license it for algorithmic trading wallpapers. Financial therapy boomed. Psychologists framed Rorschach blots shaped like tea stains. Eventually, the insanity reached Grindle himself. One moonlit evening, he caught his own reflection floating in a teapot lid and mistook it for a rival Goblin analyst. A tense negotiation followed between him and his mirror image about who should forecast cocoa prices. Upon realizing the mix-up, he laughed so hard the teapot of potentialities coughed up 2 stock tips and a limerick praising humility. It might have continued forever if not for the symposium fiasco. Academia invited Grindle to speak at the Institute of Predictive Analytics. They hoped to dissect his gift scientifically. On stage, he brewed, swirled, and announced, "The greatest market movement in a century occurs tomorrow at dawn, and none of you can stop it." Panic. Selling. Entire rows of PhDs sprinting to phones. A professor fainted into a recycling bin. Dawn arrived. Nothing much happened beyond normal volatility and a delightful sunrise. Later, Grindle explained, "Leaves were teaching you a lesson. Sometimes silence is the loudest data point." The Institute, humbled, endowed a chair in uncertified prognostication, currently vacant but heavily scented. By now, many investors recognized a pattern. The more they obsessed, the more their nerves frayed. A coalition of half-mad, half-enlightened traders decided to liberate themselves. They hosted a tea-free investment retreat. No brews allowed, only cold water and yoga. Several stocks rose anyway. The retreat interpreted it as cosmic validation. Skeptics called it coincidence. Grindle sent a fruit basket and a card. "Proud of you." Prediction: hangovers of clarity, due Thursday. In time, the mania mellowed into mythology. Grindle kept issuing bulletins, but people learned not to treat them as commandments. Instead, they became bedtime stories for data analysts. Once upon a Thursday. The leaves envisioned dancing turnips. Tens of kids of traders grew up hearing those tales and, interestingly, displayed healthier attitudes toward risk. And what of Grindle? He still occupies the corner office, now decorated with mismatched cushions and a sign reading "Fortunes steeped here." Investors still consult him, but these days they bring pastries, offer gratitude, and rarely camp in hallways. The teapot of potentialities hums contentedly, emitting bubbles shaped like small, manageable percent signs. The market, if not sane, at least learned to laugh at itself occasionally, a valuable skill, economists admit, that reduces blood pressure and donkey-brained investment stampedes. On quiet afternoons, Grindle can be found brewing a solitary cup, nose twitching at the rising steam. He smiles at patterns only he and the leaves comprehend. Sometimes they tell him a joke, usually about arbitrageurs and chamomile, and he cackles loud enough that security checks the fire alarms. But mostly, the leaves remind him of balance. Upswings need downswings, they whisper. Exhales follow inhales, and profit is tastier with perspective. Grindle agrees, pockets the lesson, and files it among the napkins. And somewhere, in some boardroom, an investor tilts a cup, squints at the residue, and chuckles. Whether or not the Goblin's magic is real no longer matters. In a world convinced that certainty exists, the sudden possibility that it doesn't was the most valuable asset of all. And they'd learned it, paradoxically, from a stockbroker whose chief credential was the courage to listen to leaves singing,